Relax and listen to the voice. The Ugly Duckling. It was lovely summer weather in the country, and the golden corn, the green oats, and the haystacks piled up in the meadows looked beautiful. The stork walking about on his long red legs chattered in the Egyptian language, which he had learnt from his mother. The cornfields and meadows were surrounded by large forests, in the midst of which were deep pools. It was, indeed, delightful to walk about in the country. In a sunny spot stood a pleasant old farmhouse, close by a deep river, and from the house down to the waterside grew great burdock leaves, so high that under the tallest of them a little child could stand upright. The spot was as wild as the center of a thick wood. In this snug retreat sat a duck on her nest, watching for her young brood to hatch. She was beginning to get tired of her task, for the little ones were a long time coming out of their shells, and she seldom had any visitors. The other ducks liked much better to swim about in the river than to climb the slippery banks and sit under a burdock leaf to have a gossip with her. At length one shell cracked, and then another, and from each egg came a living creature that lifted its head and cried, "Beep, beep, beep, beep."
"Quack, quack, quack,"
said the mother, and then they all quacked as well as they could, and looked about them on every side at the large green leaves. Their mother allowed them to look as much as they liked, because green is good for the eyes. "How large the world is," said the young ducks when they found how much more room they now had than while they were inside the eggshell.
"Do you imagine this is the whole world?"
asked the mother.
"Wait till you have seen the garden. It stretches far beyond that to the parson's field, but I have never ventured to such a distance. Are you all out?"
she continued, rising.
"No, I declare, the largest egg lies there still. I wonder how long this is to last. I am quite tired of it."
And she seated herself again on the nest. "Well, how are you getting on?" asked an old duck who paid her a visit. "One egg is not hatched yet," said the duck. "It will not break. But just look at the others. Are they not the prettiest little ducklings you ever saw? They are the image of their father, who is so unkind he never comes to see. Let me see that egg that will not break," said the duck. "I have no doubt that it's a turkey's egg. I was persuaded to hatch some once, and after all my care and trouble with the young ones, they were afraid of the water. I quacked and clucked, but all to no purpose. I could not get them to venture in. Let me look at that egg. Yes, that is a turkey's egg. Take my advice. Leave it where it is and teach the other children to swim."
"I think I will sit on it a little longer,"
said the duck.
"as I have sat so long already. A few days will be nothing."
"Please yourself," said the old duck, and she went waddling away. At last the large egg broke, and a young one crept forth, crying, "Beep, peep, beep, peep, peep." It was very large and ugly. The duck stared at it and exclaimed,
"It is very large and not like the others. I wonder if it really is a turkey. We shall soon find out. However, when we go to the water, it must go in if I have to push it myself."
On the next day the weather was delightful, and the sun shone brightly on the green burdock leaves. So the mother duck took her young brood down to the water and jumped in with a splash.
Quack, 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 quack,
Cried she, and one after another the little ducklings jumped in. The water closed over their heads, but they came up again in an instant and swam about quite prettily with their legs paddling under them as easily as possible. And the ugly duckling was also in the water, swimming with them.
Oh, oh,
Said the mother.
that is not a turkey. How well he uses his legs, and how upright he holds himself. He is my own child, and he is not so very ugly after all, if you look at him properly. Quack, 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 quack. Come with me now. I will take you into grand society and introduce you to the farmyard, but you must keep close to me, or you may be trodden upon. And above all, beware of the cat.
When they reached the farmyard, there was a great disturbance. 2 families were fighting for an eel's head, which, after all, was carried off by the cat.
See, children, that is the way of the world,
Said the mother duck, wetting her beak, for she would have liked the eel's head herself.
Come now, use your legs, and let me see how well you can behave. You must bow your heads prettily to that old duck yonder. She is the highest born of them all, and has Spanish blood. Therefore, she is well off. Don't you see she has a red flag tied to her leg, which is something very grand and a great honor for a duck? It shows that everyone is anxious not to lose her, as she can be recognized by both man and beast. Come now, don't turn your toes. A well-bred duckling spreads his feet wide apart, just like his father and mother, in this way. Now bend your neck and say, quack, quack, quack.
The ducklings did as they were bid, but the other duck stared and said,
Look, here comes another brood, as if there were not enough of us already. And what a queer-looking object one of them is. We don't want him here.
and then one flew out and bit him in the neck.
Let him alone,
Said the mother.
he is not doing any harm.
Yes, but he is so big and ugly,
Said the spiteful duck.
and therefore he must be turned out.
The others are very pretty children, said the old duck with the rag on her leg. All but that one. I wish his mother could improve him a little.
That is impossible, your grace.
Replied the mother.
He is not pretty, but he has a very good disposition, and swims as well, or even better than the others. I think he will grow up pretty, and perhaps be smaller. He has remained too long in the egg, and therefore his figure is not properly formed.
And then she stroked his neck and smoothed the feathers, saying,
It is a drake, and therefore not of so much consequence. I think he will grow up strong and able to take care of himself.
The other ducklings are graceful enough, said the old duck. Now make yourself at home, and if you can find an eel's head, you can bring it to me. And so they made themselves comfortable, but the poor duckling, who had crept out of his shell last of all, and looked so ugly, was bitten and pushed and made fun of, not only by the ducks, but by all the poultry.
He is too big,
They all said, and the turkey cock, who had been born into the world with spurs, and fancied himself really an emperor, puffed himself out like a vessel in full sail, and flew at the duckling, and became quite red in the head with passion, so that the poor little thing did not know where to go, and was quite miserable, because he was so ugly and laughed at by the whole farmyard. So it went on from day to day until it got worse and worse. The poor duckling was driven about by everyone. Even his brothers and sisters were unkind to him and would say,
"Ah, you ugly creature, I wish the cat would get you."
And his mother once said that she had wished he had never been born. The ducks pecked him, the chickens beat him, and the girl who fed the poultry kicked him with her feet. So at last he ran away, frightening the little birds in the hedge as he flew over the palings.
"They are afraid of me because I am ugly,"
he said. So he closed his eyes and flew still farther until he came out on a large moor inhabited by wild ducks. Here he remained the whole night, feeling very tired and sorrowful. In the morning, when the wild ducks rose in the air, they stared at their new comrade. "What sort of duck are you?" they all said, coming round him. He bowed to them and was as polite as he could be, but he did not reply to their question. "You are exceedingly ugly," said the wild ducks, "but that will not matter if you do not want to marry one of our family." Poor thing, he had no thoughts of marriage. All he wanted was permission to lie among the rushes and drink some of the water on the moor. After he had been on the moor for 2 days, there came 2 wild geese, or rather goslings, for they had not been out of the egg long, and were very saucy.
"Oh, listen, friend,"
said one of them to the duckling.
"you are so ugly that we like you very well. Will you go with us and become a bird of passage? Not far from here is another moor, in which there are some pretty wild geese, all unmarried. It is a chance for you to get a wife. You may be lucky, ugly as you are." Pop, pop, sounded in the air, and the 2 wild geese fell dead among the rushes, and the water was tinged with blood. Pop, pop, echoed far and wide in the distance, and whole flocks of wild geese rose up from the rushes. The sound continued from every direction, for the sportsmen surrounded the moor, and some were even seated on branches of trees, overlooking the rushes. The blue smoke from the guns rose like clouds over the dark trees, and as it floated away across the water, a number of sporting dogs bounded in among the rushes, which bent beneath them wherever they went. How they terrified the poor duckling! He turned away his head to hide it under his wing, and at the same moment a large, terrible dog passed quite near him. His jaws were open, his tongue hung out from his mouth, and his eyes glared fearfully. He thrust his nose close to the duckling, showing his sharp teeth, and then, splash, splash, he went into the water without touching him. "Oh,"
sighed the duckling,
"how thankful I am for being so ugly. Even a dog will not bite me."
And so he lay quite still, while the shot rattled through the rushes, and gun after gun was fired over him. It was late in the day before all became quiet, but even then the poor young thing did not dare to move. He waited quietly for several hours, and then, after looking carefully around him, hastened away from the moor as fast as he could. He ran over field and meadow till a storm arose, and he could hardly struggle against it. Towards evening, he reached a poor little cottage that seemed ready to fall, and only remained standing because it could not decide on which side to fall first. The storm continued so violent that the duckling could go no further. He sat down by the cottage, and then he noticed that the door was not quite closed in consequence of one of the hinges having given way. There was, therefore, a narrow opening near the bottom, large enough for him to slip through, which he did very quietly, and got a shelter for the night. A woman, a tomcat, and a hen lived in this cottage. The tomcat, who the mistress called "my little son," was a great favorite. He could raise his back and purr, and could even throw out sparks from his fur if he were stroked the wrong way. The hen had very short legs, so she was called Chickie Short Legs. She laid good eggs, and her mistress loved her as if she had been her own child. In the morning, the strange visitor was discovered, and the tomcat began to purr, and the hen to cluck.
Oh, what is this noise about?"
said the old woman, looking round the room, but her sight was not very good. Therefore, when she saw the duckling, she thought it must be a fat duck that had strayed from home.
Oh, what a prize!"
she exclaimed.
"I hope it's not a drake, for then I shall have some duck's eggs. I must wait and see."
So the duckling was allowed to remain on trial for 3 weeks, but there were no eggs. Now, the tomcat was the master of the house, and the hen was the mistress, and they always said, "We and the world," for they believed themselves to be half the world, and the better half too. The duckling thought that others might hold a different opinion on the subject, but the hen would not listen to such doubts.
"Can you lay eggs?"
she asked.
"No." "Then have the goodness to hold your tongue."
Can you raise your back, or purr, or throw out sparks?" said the tomcat. "No." "Then you have no right to express an opinion when sensible people are speaking." So the duckling sat in a corner, feeling very low-spirited, till the sunshine and the fresh air came into the room through an open door, and then he began to feel such a great longing for a swim on the water that he could not help telling the hen.
What an absurd idea,"
said the hen.
"You have nothing else to do, therefore you have foolish fancies. If you could purr or lay eggs, they would pass away."
"But it's so delightful to swim about on the water," said the duckling, "and so refreshing to feel it close over your head while you dive down to the bottom."
"Delightful indeed,"
said the hen.
"Why, you must be crazy. Ask the cat. He is the cleverest animal I know. Ask him how he would like to swim about on the water, or to dive under it, for I will not speak of my own opinion. Ask our mistress, the old woman. There is no one in the world more clever than she is. Do you think she would like to swim, or to let the water close over her head?"
"Oh, you don't understand me," said the duckling.
We don't understand you? Who can understand you, I wonder? Do you consider yourself more clever than the cat or the old woman? I will say nothing of myself. Don't imagine such nonsense, child, and thank your good fortune that you have been received here. Are you not in a warm room, and in society from which you may learn something? But you are a chatterer, and your company is not very agreeable. Believe me, I speak only for your own good." I may tell you unpleasant truths, but that is proof of my friendship. I advise you, therefore, to lay eggs and learn to purr as quickly as possible.
"Oh, I believe that I must go out into the world again," said the duckling.
Yes, do that,
said the hen. So the duckling left the cottage and soon found water on which it could swim and dive, but was avoided by all other animals because of its ugly appearance. Autumn came, and the leaves in the forest turned to orange and gold. Then, as winter approached, the wind caught them as they fell and whirled them in the cold air. The clouds, heavy with hail and snowflakes, hung low in the sky, and the raven stood on the ferns crying. It made one shiver with cold to look at him. All this was very sad for the poor little duckling. One evening, just as the sun set amid the radiant clouds, there came a large flock of beautiful birds out of the bushes. The duckling had never seen any like them before. They were swans, and they curved their graceful necks, while their soft plumage shone with dazzling whiteness. They uttered a singular cry as they spread their glorious wings and flew away from those cold regions to warmer countries across the sea. As they mounted higher and higher in the air, the ugly little duckling felt quite a strange sensation as he watched them. He whirled himself in the water like a wheel, stretched out his neck towards them, and uttered a cry so strange that it frightened himself. Could he ever forget those beautiful, happy birds? And when at last they were out of his sight, he dived under the water and rose again, almost beside himself with excitement. He knew not the names of these birds, nor where they had flown, but he felt towards them as he had never felt for any other bird in the world. He was not envious of these beautiful creatures, but he wished to be as lovely as they. Poor ugly creature! How gladly he would have lived even with the ducks, had they only given him encouragement. The winter grew colder and colder. He was obliged to swim about on the water to keep it from freezing, but every night the space on which he swam became smaller and smaller. At length it froze so hard that the ice in the water crackled as he moved, and the duckling had to paddle with his legs as well as he could to keep the space from closing up. He became exhausted at last, and lay still and helpless, frozen fast in the ice. Early in the morning, a peasant who was passing by saw what had happened. He broke the ice in pieces with his wooden shoe and carried the duckling home to his wife. The warmth revived the poor little creature, but when the children wanted to play with him, the duckling thought they would do him some harm, so he started up in terror, fluttered into the milk pan, and splashed the milk about the room. The woman clapped her hands, which frightened him still more. He flew first into the butter cask, and then into the meal tub and out again. What a condition he was in! The woman screamed and struck at him with the tongs. The children laughed and screamed and tumbled over each other in their efforts to catch him, but luckily he escaped. The door stood open. The poor creature could just manage to slip out among the bushes and lie down quite exhausted in the newly fallen snow. It would be very sad were I to relate all the misery and privations which the poor little duckling endured during the hard winter, but when it had passed, he found himself lying one morning in a moor amongst the rushes. He felt the warm sun shining and heard the larks singing and saw that all around was beautiful spring. Then the young bird felt that his wings were strong as he flapped them against his sides and rose high into the air. They bore him onwards until he found himself in a large garden before he well knew how it had happened. The apple trees were in full blossom, and the fragrant elders bent their long green branches down to the stream which wound round a smooth lawn. Everything looked beautiful in the freshness of early spring. From a thicket close by came 3 beautiful white swans, rustling their feathers and swimming lightly over the smooth water. The duckling remembered the lovely birds and felt more strangely unhappy than ever. "I will fly to those royal birds," he exclaimed, "and they will kill me because I am so ugly and dare to approach them. But it does not matter. Better to be killed by them than pecked by the ducks, beaten by the hens, pushed about by the maiden who feeds the poultry, or starved with hunger in the winter." And then he flew to the water and swam towards the beautiful swans. The moment they espied the stranger, they rushed to meet him with outstretched wings. "Kill me," said the poor bird, and he bent his head down to the surface of the water and awaited death. But what did he see in the clear stream below? His own image, no longer a dark gray bird, ugly and disagreeable to look at, but a graceful and beautiful swan. To be born in a duck's nest, in a farmyard, is of no consequence to a bird if it is hatched from a swan's egg. He now felt glad at having suffered sorrow and trouble, because it enabled him to enjoy so much better all the pleasure and happiness around him, for the great swans swam round the newcomer and stroked his neck with their beaks as a welcome. Into the garden presently came some little children and threw bread and cake into the water.
"See,"
cried the youngest,
"there is a new one."
and the rest were delighted and ran to their father and mother, dancing and clapping their hands and shouting joyously.
"There is another swan. Come, a new one has arrived."
Then they threw more bread and cake into the water and said,
"The new one is the most beautiful of all. He is so young and pretty."
and the old swans bowed their heads before him. Then he felt quite ashamed and hid his head under his wing, for he did not know what to do. He was so happy and yet not at all proud. He had been persecuted and despised for his ugliness, and now he heard them say he was the most beautiful of all the birds. Even the elder tree bent down its boughs into the water before him, and the sun shone warm and bright. Then he rustled his feathers, curved his slender neck, and cried joyfully from the depths of his heart, "I never dreamed of such happiness as this while I was an ugly duckling." The Fir Tree. Far down in the forest, where the warm sun and the fresh air made a sweet resting place, grew a pretty little fir tree, and yet it was not happy. It wished so much to be tall like its companions, the pines and firs which grew around it. The sun shone, and the soft air fluttered its leaves, and the little peasant children passed by, prattling merrily, but the fir tree heeded them not. Sometimes the children would bring a large basket of raspberries or strawberries, wreathed on a straw, and seat themselves near the fir tree, and say, "Is it not a pretty little tree?" which made it feel more unhappy than before. And yet all this while the tree grew a notch or a joint taller every year, for by the number of joints in the stem of a fir tree we can discover its age. Still, as it grew, it complained,
"Oh, how I wish I were as tall as the other trees." Then I would spread out my branches on every side, and my top would overlook the wide world. I should have the birds building their nests on my boughs, and when the wind blew, I should bow with stately dignity like my tall companions."
The tree was so discontented that it took no pleasure in the warm sunshine, the birds, or the rosy clouds that floated over it morning and evening. Sometimes in winter, when the snow lay white and glittering on the ground, a hare would come springing along and jump right over the little tree. And then how mortified it would feel! 2 winters passed, and when the third arrived, the tree had grown so tall that the hare was obliged to run round it. Yet it remained unsatisfied, and would exclaim,
"Oh, if I could but keep on growing tall and old! There is nothing else worth caring for in the world."
In the autumn, as usual, the woodcutters came and cut down several of the tallest trees, and the young fir tree, which was now grown to its full height, shuddered as the noble trees fell to the earth with a crash. After the branches were lopped off, the trunks looked so slender and bare that they could scarcely be recognized. Then they were placed upon wagons and drawn by horses out of the forest. Where were they going? What would become of them? The young fir tree wished very much to know. So in the spring, when the swallows and the storks came, it asked,
"Do you know where those trees were taken? Did you meet them?"
The swallows knew nothing, but the stork, after a little reflection, nodded his head and said, "Yes, I think I do. I met several new ships when I flew from Egypt, and they had fine masts that smelt like fir. I think these must have been the trees. I assure you they were very stately, very stately."
"Oh, how I wish I were tall enough to go on the sea,"
said the fir tree.
"What is the sea, and what does it look like?"
"It would take too much time to explain," said the stork, flying quickly away. "Rejoice in thy youth," said the sunbeam. "Rejoice in thy fresh growth, and the young life that is in thee." And the wind kissed the tree, and the dew watered it with tears, but the fir tree regarded them not. Christmas time drew near, and many young trees were cut down, some even smaller and younger than the fir tree, who enjoyed neither rest nor peace with longing to leave its forest home. These young trees, which were chosen for their beauty, kept their branches, and were also laid on wagons and drawn by horses out of the forest.
"Where are they going?"
asked the fir tree.
"They are not taller than I am. Indeed, one is much less. And why are the branches not cut off? Where are they going?"
We know,
sang the sparrows.
We have looked in at the windows of the houses in the town, and we know what is done with them. They are dressed up in the most splendid manner. We have seen them standing in the middle of a warm room and adorned with all sorts of beautiful things. Honey cakes, gilded apples, playthings, and many hundreds of wax tapers.
"And then?"
asked the fir tree, trembling through all its branches.
"And then what happens?"
We did not see any more,
said the sparrows.
But this was enough for us.
I wonder whether anything so brilliant will ever happen to me,
thought the fir tree.
It would be much better than crossing the sea. I long for it almost with pain. Oh, when will Christmas be here? I am now as tall and well grown as those which were taken away last year.
Oh, that I were now laid on the wagon, or standing in the warm room, with all that brightness and splendor around me. Something better and more beautiful is to come after, or the trees would not be so decked out. Yes, what follows will be grander and more splendid. What can it be? I am weary with longing. I scarcely know how to feel.
Rejoice with us, said the air and the sunlight. Enjoy thine own bright life in the fresh air. But the tree would not rejoice, though it grew taller every day, and winter and summer its dark green foliage might be seen in the forest, while passers-by would say, "What a beautiful tree!" A short time before Christmas, the discontented fir tree was the first to fall. As the axe cut through the stem and divided the pith, the tree fell with a groan to the earth, conscious of pain and faintness, and forgetting all its anticipations of happiness, in sorrow at leaving its home in the forest. It knew that it should never again see its dear old companions, the trees, nor the little bushes and many-colored flowers that had grown by its side, perhaps not even the birds. Neither was the journey at all pleasant. The tree first recovered itself while being unpacked in the courtyard of a house with several other trees, and it heard a man say, "We only want one, and this is the prettiest." Then came two servants in grand livery, and carried the fir tree into a large and beautiful apartment. On the walls hung pictures, and near the great stove stood great china vases with lions on the lids. There were rocking chairs, silken sofas, large tables covered with pictures, books and playthings worth a great deal of money. At least, the children said so. Then the fir tree was placed in a large tub full of sand, but green baize hung all around it so that no one could see it was a tub, and it stood on a very handsome carpet. How the fir tree trembled! What was going to happen to him now? Some young ladies came, and the servants helped them to adorn the tree. On one branch they hung little bags cut out of colored paper, and each bag was filled with sweetmeats. From other branches hung gilded apples and walnuts, as if they had grown there, and above and all around were hundreds of red, blue, and white tapers, which were fastened on the branches. Dolls, exactly like real babies, were placed under the green leaves. The tree had never seen such things before, and at the very top was fastened a glittering star made of tinsel. Oh, it was very beautiful. "This evening," they all exclaimed, "how bright it will be!" "Oh, that evening were to come," thought the tree, "and the tapers lighted. Then I shall know what else is going to happen. Will the trees of the forest come to see me? I wonder if the sparrows will peep in at the windows as they fly. Shall I grow faster here, and keep on all these ornaments summer and winter?" But guessing was of very little use. It made his bark ache, and this pain is as bad for a slender fir tree as a headache is for us. At last the tapers were lighted, and then what a glistening blaze of light the tree presented! It trembled so with joy in all of its branches that one of the candles fell among the green leaves and burnt some of them.
"Help! Help!"
exclaimed the young ladies, but there was no danger, for they quickly extinguished the fire. After this, the tree tried not to tremble at all. Though the fire frightened him, he was so anxious not to hurt any of the beautiful ornaments, even while their brilliancy dazzled him. And now the folding doors were thrown open, and a troop of children rushed in as if they had intended to upset the tree. They were followed more silently by their elders. For a moment the little ones stood silent with astonishment, and then they shouted for joy until the room rang, and they danced merrily round the tree, while one present after another was taken from it.
"What are they doing? What will happen next?"
thought the fir. At last the candles burnt down to the branches and were put out. Then the children received permission to plunder the tree. Oh, how they rushed upon it, till the branches cracked, and had it not been fastened with the glistening star to the ceiling, it might have been thrown down. The children then danced about with their pretty toys, and no one noticed the tree, except the children's maid, who came and peeped among the branches to see if an apple or a fig had possibly been forgotten.
"A story! A story!"
cried the children, pulling a little fat man towards the tree. "Now we shall be in the green shade," said the man, as he seated himself under it, "and the tree will have the pleasure of hearing also. But I shall only relate one story. What shall it be? Ivide Avide, or Humpty Dumpty, who fell down the stairs, but soon got up again, and at last married a princess?"
"Ivide Avide!"
cried some.
"Humpty Dumpty!"
cried others, and there was a fine shouting and crying out. But the fir tree remained quite still and thought to himself,
"Shall I have anything to do with all this?"
but he had already amused them as much as they wished. Then the old man told them the story of Humpty Dumpty, how he fell down the stairs, and was raised up again, and married a princess. And the children clapped their hands and cried,
"Tell another! Tell another!"
for they wanted to hear the story of Ivide Avide, but they only had Humpty Dumpty. After this, the fir tree became quite silent and thoughtful. Never had the birds in the forest told such tales as Humpty Dumpty, who fell down the stairs and yet married a princess.
"Ah, yes, so it happens in the world,"
thought the fir tree. He believed it all because it was related by such a nice man.
"Ah, well,"
He thought,
who knows? Perhaps I may fall down too and marry a princess.
and he looked forward joyfully to the next evening, expecting to be again decked out with lights and playthings, gold and fruit.
"Tomorrow I will not tremble,"
Thought he.
"I will enjoy all my splendor, and I shall hear the story of Humpty Dumpty again, and perhaps Ivide Avide."
And the tree remained quiet and thoughtful all night. In the morning, the servants and the housemaid came in.
"Now,"
Thought the fir,
all my splendor is going to begin again.
but they dragged him out of the room and upstairs to the garret, and threw him on the floor in a dark corner where no daylight shone, and there they left him.
What does this mean?
Thought the tree,
What am I to do here? I can hear nothing in a place like this.
and he had time enough to think, for days and nights passed and no one came near him, and when at last somebody did come, it was only to put away large boxes in a corner. So the tree was completely hidden from sight, as if it had never existed.
It is winter now,
Thought the tree,
the ground is hard and covered with snow, so that people cannot plant me. I shall be sheltered here, I dare say, until spring comes. How thoughtful and kind everybody is to me. Still, I wish this place were not so dark as well as lonely, with not even a little hare to look at. How pleasant it was out in the forest while the snow lay on the ground when the hare would run by. Yes, and jump over me too, although I did not like it then. Oh, it is terribly lonely here. Squeak, squeak,
said a little mouse, creeping cautiously towards the tree. And then came another, and they both sniffed at the fir tree and crept between the branches.
Oh, it is very cold here,
said the little mouse.
or else we should be so comfortable here. Shouldn't we, you old fir tree?
I am not old, said the fir tree. There are many who are older than I am.
Where do you come from, and what do you know?
Asked the mice, who were full of curiosity.
Have you seen the most beautiful places in the world, and can you tell us about them? And have you been in the storeroom, where cheeses lie on the shelf, and hams hang from the ceiling? One can run about on tallow candles there, and go in thin and come out fat.
I know nothing of that place,
said the fir tree.
but I know the wood where the sun shines and the bird sings.
And then the tree told the little mice all about its youth. They had never heard such an account in their lives, and after they had listened to it attentively, they said,
What a number of things you have seen! You must have been very happy. Happy?
Exclaimed the fir tree, and then, as he reflected upon what he had been telling them, he said,
Ah, yes. After all, those were happy days.
But when he went on and related all about Christmas Eve, and how he had been dressed up with cakes and lights, the mice said,
How happy you must have been, you old fir tree.
I am not old at all,
replied the tree.
I only came from the forest this winter. I am now checked in my growth.
What splendid stories you can relate,
said the little mice. And the next night, 4 other mice came with them to hear what the tree had to tell. The more he talked, the more he remembered, and then he thought to himself,
Those were happy days, but they may come again. Humpty Dumpty fell down the stairs, and yet he married the princess. Perhaps I may marry a princess too.
And the fir tree thought of the pretty little birch tree that grew in the forest, which was to him a real beautiful princess.
Who is Humpty Dumpty?
Asked the little mice. And then the tree related the whole story. He could remember every single word, and the little mice were so delighted with it that they were ready to jump to the top of the tree. The next night, a great many more mice made their appearance, and on Sunday, 2 rats came with them, but they said it was not a pretty story at all, and the little mice were very sorry, for it made them also think less of it.
Do you only know one story?
Asked the rats.
Only one,
replied the fir tree.
I heard it on the happiest evening of my life, but I did not know I was so happy at the time. We think it's a very miserable story, said the rats. Don't you know any stories about bacon or tallow in the storeroom? No, replied the tree. Many thanks to you then, replied the rats, and they marched off.
The little mice also kept away after this, and the tree sighed and said,
It was very pleasant when the merry little mice sat round me and listened while I talked. Now that is all past too. However, I still consider myself happy when someone comes to take me out of this place.
But would this ever happen? Yes. One morning, people came to clear out the garret. The boxes were packed away, and the tree was pulled out of the corner and thrown roughly on the garret floor. Then the servant dragged it out upon the staircase, where the daylight shone.
Now life is beginning again,
said the tree, rejoicing in the sunshine and fresh air. Then it was carried downstairs and taken into the courtyard so quickly that it forgot to think of itself and could only look about. There was so much to be seen. The court was close to the garden, where everything looked blooming. Fresh and fragrant roses hung over the little palings. The linden trees were in blossom, while the swallows flew here and there, crying,
"Twit, twit, 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 my mate is coming."
but it was not the fir tree they meant.
"Now I shall live,"
cried the tree, joyfully spreading out its branches. But alas, they were all withered and yellow, and it lay in a corner amongst weeds and nettles. The star of gold paper still stuck in the top of the tree and glittered in the sunshine. In the same courtyard, 2 of the merry children were playing who had danced round the tree at Christmas and had been so happy. The youngest saw the gilded star and ran and pulled it off the tree.
"Look what is sticking to the ugly old fir tree,"
said the child, treading on the branches till they crackled under his boots. And the tree saw all the fresh, bright flowers in the garden, and then looked at itself, and wished it had remained in the dark corner of the garret. It thought of its fresh youth in the forest, of the merry Christmas evening, and of the little mice who had listened to the story of Humpty Dumpty.
"Past, past,"
said the old tree.
"Oh, had I but enjoyed myself while I could have done so! But now it is too late."
And then a lad came and chopped the tree into small pieces, till a large bundle lay in a heap on the ground. The pieces were placed in a fire under the copper, and they quickly blazed up brightly, while the tree sighed so deeply that each sigh was like a pistol shot. Then the children who were at play came and seated themselves in front of the fire and looked at it and cried, "Pop, pop!" But at each pop, which was a deep sigh, the tree was thinking of a summer day in the forest, and of Christmas evening, and of Humpty Dumpty, the only story it had ever heard or knew how to relate, till at last it was consumed. The boys still played in the garden, and the youngest wore the golden star on his breast, with which the tree had been adorned during the happiest evening of its existence. Now all was past. The tree's life was past, and the story also, for all stories must come to an end at last. The Little Elder Tree Mother. There was once a little boy who had caught cold. He had gone out and got wet feet. Nobody had the least idea how it had happened. The weather was quite dry. His mother undressed him, put him to bed, and ordered the teapot to be brought in, that she might make him a good cup of tea from the elder tree blossoms, which is so warming. At the same time, the kind-hearted old man, who lived by himself in the upper story of the house, came inside. He led a lonely life, for he had no wife and children, but he loved the children of others very much, and he could tell so many fairy tales and stories that it was a pleasure to hear him.
"Now drink your tea,"
said the mother.
"Perhaps you will hear a story."
"Yes, if I only knew a fresh one," said the old man, and nodded smilingly. "But how did the little fellow get his wet feet?" he then asked.
"That,"
replied the mother,
"nobody can understand."
"Will you tell me a story?"
asked the boy. "Yes, if you can tell me as nearly as possible how deep is the gutter in the little street where you go to school."
"Just half as high as my top boots,"
replied the boy.
"but then I must stand in the deepest holes."
"There, now we know where you got your wet feet," said the old man. "I ought to tell you a story, but the worst of it is, I do not know any more."
"You could make one up,"
said the little boy.
"Mother says you could tell a fairy tale about anything you look at or touch."
That is all very well, but such tales or stories are worth nothing. No, the right ones come by themselves and knock at my forehead, saying, 'Here I am.'"
"Will not one knock soon?"
asked the boy, and the mother smiled while she put elder tree blossoms into the teapot and poured boiling water over them.
"Pray, tell me a story."
"Yes, if stories came by themselves, they are so proud. They only come when they please. But wait," he said suddenly. "There is one. Look at the teapot. There's a story in it now." And the little boy looked at the teapot. The lid rose up gradually. The elder tree blossoms sprang forth, one by one, fresh and white. Long boughs came forth. Even out of the spout they grew up in all directions and formed a bush, nay, a large elder tree, which stretched its branches up to the bed and pushed the curtains aside. And there were so many blossoms and such a sweet fragrance. In the midst of the tree sat a kindly-looking old woman with a strange dress. It was as green as the leaves and trimmed with large white blossoms, so that it was difficult to say whether it was real cloth or the leaves and blossoms of the elder tree.
"What is this woman's name?"
asked the little boy. "Well, the Romans and Greeks used to call her Dryad," said the old man. "But we do not understand that. Out in the sailors' quarter they give her a better name. There she is called Elder Tree Mother. Now you must attentively listen to her and look at the beautiful elder tree. Just such a large tree, covered with flowers, stands out there. It grew in the corner of a humble little yard. Under this tree sat two old people one afternoon in the beautiful sunshine. He was an old sailor, and she his old wife. They had already great-grandchildren, and were soon to celebrate their golden wedding, but they could not remember the date. And the elder tree mother was sitting in the tree and looked as pleased as this one here. 'I know very well when the golden wedding is to take place,' she said. But they did not hear it. They were talking of bygone days. 'Well, do you remember,' said the old sailor, 'when we were quite small and used to run about and play? It was in the very same yard we are now. We used to put little branches into the ground and make a garden.'
'Yes,'
said the old woman.
'I remember it very well. We used to water the branches, and one of them, an elder tree branch, took root and grew and became the large tree under which we are now sitting as old people.'
'Certainly you are right,' he said. 'And in yonder corner stood a large water tub. There I used to sail my boat, which I had cut out myself. It sailed so well, but soon I had to sail somewhere else.'
'But first we went to school to learn something,'
she said.
'and then we were confirmed. We both wept on that day, but in the afternoon we went out hand in hand and ascended the high round tower and looked out into the wide world right over Copenhagen and the sea. Then we walked to Fredericksburg, where the king and the queen were sailing about in their magnificent boat on the canals.
But soon I had to sail about somewhere else, and for many years I was traveling about far away from home.
And I often cried about you, for I was afraid lest you would drown and lying at the bottom of the sea. Many a time I got up in the night and looked if the weathercock had turned. It turned often, but you did not return. I remember one day distinctly. The rain was pouring down in torrents. The dustman had come to the house where I was in service. I went down with the dustbin and stood for a moment in the doorway and looked at the dreadful weather. Then the postman gave me a letter. It was from you. Heavens, how that letter had traveled about! I tore it open and read it. I cried and laughed at the same time and was so happy. Therein was written that you were staying in the hot countries where the coffee grows. These must be marvelous countries. You said a great deal about them, and I read all while the rain was pouring down and I was standing there with the dustbin. Then suddenly, someone put his arm round my waist.
"Yes, and you gave him a hearty smack on the cheek," said the old man.
I did not know that it was you. You had come as quickly as your letter, and you looked so handsome, and so you do still. You had a large yellow silk handkerchief in your pocket and a shining hat on. You looked so well, and the weather in the street was horrible.
"Then we married," he said. "Do you remember how we got our first boy, and then Mary, Niles, Peter, John, and Christian?"
Oh, yes, and now they have all grown up and have become useful members of society, whom everyone cares for.
"And their children have had children again," said the old sailor. "Yes, these are children's children, and they are strong and healthy. If I am not mistaken, our wedding took place at this season of the year."
Yes, today is your golden wedding day,
said the little elder tree mother, stretching her head down between the two old people, who thought that she was their neighbor who was nodding to them. They looked at each other and clasped hands. Soon afterwards, the children and grandchildren came, for they knew very well that it was the golden wedding day. They had already wished them joy and happiness in the morning, but the old people had forgotten it, although they remembered things so well that had passed many, many years ago. The elder tree smelt strongly, and the setting sun illuminated the faces of the two old people, so that they looked quite rosy. The youngest of the grandchildren danced round them and cried merrily that there would be a feast in the evening, for they were to have hot potatoes. And the elder mother nodded in the tree and cried,
"Hooray!"
with the others.
But that was no fairy tale,
said the little boy who had listened to it. "You will presently understand it," said the old man who told the story. "Let us ask little elder tree mother about it."
That was no fairy tale,
said the little elder tree mother.
But now it comes. Real life furnishes us with subjects for the most wonderful fairy tales, for otherwise my beautiful elder bush could not have grown forth out of a teapot.
And then she took the little boy out of bed and placed him on her bosom. The elder branches, full of blossoms, closed over them. It was as if they sat in a thick leafy bower which flew with them through the air. It was beautiful beyond all description. The little elder tree mother had suddenly become a charming young girl, but her dress was still of the same green material, covered with white blossoms. As the elder tree mother had worn, she had a real elder blossom on her bosom, and a wreath of the same flowers was worn round her curly golden hair. Her eyes were so large and so blue that it was wonderful to look at them. She and the boy kissed each other, and then they were of the same age and felt the same joys. They walked hand in hand out of the bower, and now stood at home in a beautiful flower garden. Near the green lawn, the father's walking stick was tied to a post. There was life in this stick for the little ones, for as soon as they seated themselves upon it, the polished knob turned into a neighing horse's head, a long black mane was fluttering in the wind, and 4 strong, slender legs grew out. The animal was fiery and spirited. They galloped around the lawn.
"Hooray! Now we shall ride far away, many miles," said the boy. "We shall ride to the nobleman's estate where we were last year."
And they rode round the lawn again, and the little girl, who as we know was no other than the little elder tree mother, continually cried,
"Now we are in the country. Do you see the farmhouse there, with the large baking stove, which projects like a gigantic egg out of the wall into the road? The elder tree spreads its branches over it, and the cock struts about and scratches for the hens. Look how proud he is. Now we are near the church. It stands on a high hill under the spreading oak trees. One of them is half dead. Now we are at the smithy, where the fire roars and the half-naked men beat with their hammers so that the sparks fly far and wide. Let's be off to the beautiful farm."
And they passed by everything the little girl, who was sitting behind on the stick, described, and the boy saw it, and yet they only went round the lawn. Then they played in a sidewalk, and marked out a little garden on the ground. She took elder blossoms out of her hair and planted them, and they grew exactly like those the old people planted when they were children, as we have heard before. They walked about hand in hand, just as the old couple had done when they were little, but they did not go to the Round Tower, nor to the Fredericksburg Garden. No, the little girl seized the boy round the waist, and then they flew far into the country. It was spring, and it became summer. It was autumn, and it became winter. And thousands of pictures reflected themselves in the boy's eyes and heart, and the little girl always sang again,
"You will never forget that."
And during their whole flight, the elder tree smelt so sweetly. He noticed the roses and the fresh beeches, but the elder tree smelt much stronger, for the flowers were fixed on the little girl's bosom, against which the boy often rested his head during the flight.
"It is beautiful here in the spring,"
said the little girl, and they were again in the green beechwood, where the thyme breathed forth sweet fragrance at their feet, and the pink anemones looked lovely in the green moss. Oh, that it were always spring in the fragrant beechwood!
"Here it is splendid in summer,"
she said, and they passed by old castles of the age of chivalry. The high walls and indented battlements were reflected in the water of the ditches, on which swans were swimming and peering into the old shady avenues. The corn waved in the field like a yellow sea. Red and yellow flowers grew in the ditches, wild hops and convolvuli in full bloom in the hedges. In the evening the moon rose, large and round, and the hayricks in the meadows smelt sweetly.
"One can never forget it. Here it is beautiful in autumn,"
said the little girl, and the atmosphere seemed twice as high and blue, while the woods shone with crimson, green, and gold. The hounds were running off. flocks of wild fowl flew screaming over the barrows, while the bramble bushes twined around the old stones. The dark blue sea was covered with white-sailed ships, and in the barn sat old women, girls, and children picking hops into a large tub. The young ones sang songs, and the old people told fairy tales about goblins and sorcerers. It could not be more pleasant anywhere.
"Here it's agreeable in winter,"
said the little girl, and all the trees were covered with hoarfrost, so that they looked like white coral. The snow creaked under one's feet, as if one had new boots on. One shooting star after another traversed the sky. In the room the Christmas tree was lit, and there were song and merriment. In the peasant's cottage the violins sounded, and games were played for apple quarters. Even the poorest child said, "It is beautiful in winter." And indeed it was beautiful, and the little girl showed everything to the boy, and the elder tree continued to breathe forth sweet perfume, while the red flag with the white cross was streaming in the wind. It was the flag under which the old sailor had served. The boy became a youth. He was to go out into the wide world, far away to the countries where the coffee grows. But at parting, the little girl took an elder blossom from her breast and gave it to him as a keepsake. He placed it in his prayer book, and when he opened it in distant lands, it was always at the place where the flower of remembrance was lying. And the more he looked at it, the fresher it became, so that he could almost smell the fragrance of the woods at home. He distinctly saw the little girl with her bright blue eyes peeping out from behind the petals, and heard her whispering,
"Here it is beautiful in spring, in summer, in autumn, and in winter."
And hundreds of pictures passed through his mind. Thus many years rolled by. He had now become an old man, and was sitting with his old wife under an elder tree in full bloom. They held each other by the hand exactly as the great-grandfather and the great-grandmother had done outside, and like them, they talked about bygone days and of their golden wedding. The little girl with the blue eyes and elder blossoms in her hair was sitting high up in the tree and nodded to them, saying,
"Today is the golden wedding."
And then she took 2 flowers out of her wreath and kissed them. They glittered at first like silver, then like gold, and when she placed them on the heads of the old people, each flower became a golden crown. There they both sat like a king and queen under the sweet-smelling tree, which looked exactly like an elder tree, and he told his wife the story of the elder tree mother as it had been told to him when he was a little boy. They were both of opinion that the story contained many points like their own, and these similarities they liked best.
"Yes, so it is,"
said the little girl in the tree.
"Some call me Little Elder Tree Mother, others a Dryad, but my real name is Remembrance. It is I who sit in the tree which grows and grows. I can remember things and tell stories, but let's see if you have still got your flower."
And the old man opened his prayer book. The elder blossom was still in it, and as fresh as if it had only just been put in. Remembrance nodded, and the 2 old people, with the golden crowns on their heads, sat in the glowing evening sun. They closed their eyes, and... Well, now the story is ended. The little boy in bed did not know whether he had dreamt it or heard it told. The teapot stood on the table, but no elder tree was growing out of it, and the old man who had told the story was on the point of leaving the room, and he did go out.
"How beautiful it was,"
said the little boy.
"Mother, I have been to warm countries." "I believe you,"
said the mother.
If one takes 2 cups of hot elder tea, it is quite natural that one gets into warm countries.
And she covered him up well, so that he might not take cold.
You have slept soundly while I was arguing with the old man whether it was a story or a fairy tale. And what has become of the little elder tree, Mother?
Asked the boy.
She is in the teapot,
Said the mother.
and there she may remain.
The Jumper. The flea, the grasshopper, and the skipjack once wanted to see which of them could jump highest, and they invited the whole world, and whoever else would come, to see the grand sight. And there the 3 famous jumpers were met together in the room.
"Yes, I'll give my daughter to him who jumps highest,"
said the king.
"for it would be mean to let these people jump for nothing."
The flea stepped out first. He had very pretty manners, and bowed in all directions, for he had young ladies' blood in his veins, and was accustomed to consort only with human beings, and that was of great consequence. Then came the grasshopper. He was certainly much heavier, but he had a good figure, and he wore the green uniform that was born with him. This person, moreover, maintained that he belonged to a very old family in the land of Egypt, and that he was highly esteemed there. He had just come from the field, he said, and had been put into a card-house 3 stories high, and all made of picture cards with the figures turned inwards. There were doors and windows in the house, cut in the body of the Queen of Hearts.
I sing so, he said, that 16 native crickets who have chirped from their youth up, and have never yet had a card-house of their own, would become thinner than they are with envy if they were to hear me.
Both of them, the flea and the grasshopper, took care to announce who they were, and that they considered themselves entitled to marry a princess. The skipjack said nothing, but it was said of him that he thought all the more, and directly the yard dog had smelt at him, he was ready to assert that the skipjack was of good family, and formed from the breastbone of an undoubted goose. The old counselor, who had received 3 medals for holding his tongue, declared that the skipjack possessed the gift of prophecy. One could tell by his bones whether there would be a severe winter or a mild one, and that's more than one can always tell from the breastbone of the man who writes the almanac.
"I shall not say anything more,"
said the old king.
"I only go on quietly, and always think the best."
Now they were to take their jump. The flea sprang so high that no one could see him, and then they asserted that he had not jumped at all. That was very mean. The grasshopper only sprang half as high, but he sprang straight into the king's face, and the king declared that that was horribly rude. The skipjack stood a long time considering. At last, people thought that he could not jump at all.
"I only hope he has not become unwell,"
said the yard dog, and then he smelt at him again. Tap! He sprang with a little crooked jump just into the lap of the princess, who sat on a low golden stool. Then the king said,
"The highest leap was taken by him who jumped up to my daughter, for therein lies the point. But it requires head to achieve that, and the skipjack has shown that he has a head."
And so he had the princess.
Well, I jumped highest after all,
said the flea.
But it's all the same. Let her have the goose bone with its lump of wax and bit of stick. I jumped the highest, But in this world, a body is required if one wishes to be seen.
And the flea went into foreign military service, where it is said that he was killed. The grasshopper seated himself out in the ditch, and thought and considered how things happened in the world, and he too said,
"A body is required. Body is required."
And then he sang his own melancholy song, and from that we have gathered this story, which they say is not true, though it's in print. Thank you all again for coming and listening. We appreciate your time. We hope that you've enjoyed this edition of the Fairy Tales of Hans Christian Andersen, Volume 10. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Share it to social media, and show it off to your friends and family. And after you've done all that, don't forget to take care of yourselves and take care of each other. We wish you a good night's sleep, and we hope that you have sweet dreams.